Well, first of all, thanks so much for coming back. It's very difficult to be the last speaker on a day like today because we've heard a lot of really interesting things. I know that we all have our heads full of lots of different ideas. Really, an incredibly smart group of people in this room. And thank you so much for spending a Saturday with all of us. I've been taking notes all day because a closing plenary is not supposed to be some sort of a canned presentation that you've given 15 times before, but it's supposed to reflect what we've heard and talked about during the course of the day. So if my slides seem a little disjointed, it's because I'm kind of pulling them out of a hat here, trying to put together something that I think is relevant within the terms of what we've done today. So please bear with me. I'd also like to thank the people who are tuning in via the internet. I know that it's midnight in Central Europe right now, so all of you guys who were doing World IA Day over there like ages ago, thanks for sticking with us. All of you in Hong Kong and Australia, good morning. But mainly this is for all of you guys. And I want to thank Alberta because she did point out that this is the last of the sessions at World IA Day. And as far as I'm concerned, this is probably one of the few times in my entire life when I've literally had the last word. And I'm rather enjoying it. This is the title. Have any of you actually been to the website and checked out the theme of the day today? Let me see some hands. Okay, now, Andrea, I realize that you've got your PhD in library science and everything's really cool, but how many of you would have shown up if you had seen that as the theme for today? Okay, 4, 5, 6 hands. Very good. Right, let me show you some bullet points real quick. If I can get this thing, the clicker to work. Of course, labels that are completely self-explanatory because that's what we do as information architects. So the first one is, it's all Greek to me. And I do have some notes someplace that explain what this is all about. Well, I'll get back to it's all Greek to me in a minute. It has a little bit to do with Dan Klein's definition of information architecture. If we move on to a firm notion, those of you who have pencil and paper, you might want to write that down, a firm notion. Here I'd like to address some of the issues around the value of information architecture that Aaron was talking about, and the relationships. Relationships is a key word that David Fiorito talked about. In terms of big data and bigger insights, I think that's kind of the elephant in the room. We haven't talked about big data at all today. And that rather surprises me. Big data is so mainstream that even the Harvard Business Review is talking about big data. So I'd like to spend a little time talking about that. One of the other themes of today's day is to talk about the architecture part of information architecture. So I'd like to get into that a little bit. Design, mass production. Greg Noodleman showed us that design is a question of functionality. It's functionality over form. But we do have some skills as IAs that relate to patterns and design that I think are good, and I think that we are also a little bit in danger with some of the things we're doing, also in terms of the kinds of processes that we use to accomplish our work. And then finally, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Charles H. Duell. So that's kind of the theme of my little talk. And I have half an hour, and I'm going to try and make it, but it's going to be a little tricky. I'll do my best. Let's go back to the title here. I said it's all Greek to me. I didn't go to library school. I have 3 semi-useless liberal arts degrees in performing arts, political science, and almost Egyptology. I flunked hieroglyphics because I thought past tense mean just moving the bird backwards, but apparently it doesn't work that way. Who knew? I'm quite serious about that, by the way. Exploring and expanding the ontologies of information architecture. And David was kind enough to talk about Dan Klein's definition in terms of taxonomies and ontologies. I mean, I had to go to the dictionary and say, oh, what the hell is an ontology? I know enough classical language to know that onto means being from the Greek, and ology is the study of. So it's the study of being. And I had a lot of philosophy when I was in school, so I understand how the followers of Plato said, well, you know, a being has to be a thing, a noun that's an actual thing. And then there were other people who were rather more metaphysical in their approach. The way we're using it today, though, sort of expands on the metaphysical aspects of ontology in its original sense, or ontos, in that we are talking about relationships and we are talking about hierarchies. So it's a very good word to use, but it's also the kind of word that is absolutely guaranteed to scare the shit out of your boss if you try to use this. So if we're going to sell IA and prove our value, I would not suggest that we use words like this, okay? So we're just going to keep this in the family. This is a tweet I found the other day, a fellow by the name of Jonathan Coleman. They linked everything together and then they structured the bejesus out of it. And the hashtag is ontology, which must be a first on Twitter. Whoever uses ontology as a hashtag. Anyway, I thought I'd share that with you. But moving on to a firm notion, which of course you've all written down. And I think that this is really where information architecture provides value. Here we have some letters. These are content objects. And the content strategists and the business analysts and a lot of other very, very smart people can tell us what need to be in all of these boxes. Now, if you ever played Scrabble, you know that you can rearrange these things in all kinds of different ways. And sometimes what you make is more valuable than something else. I can make a series of materials. I can rearrange them again, and I get something very different. There are a lot of people talking about the boxes these days, and that's fine. The boxes are violently important. Content is still what drives this industry. But it's the arrows that connect them that give us the unique value to create value for our employers. So please keep that in mind. I think it's important. Moving on, big data. Everybody is talking about big data. Walmart collects, I kid you not, 2.5 petabytes of information every hour. That equates to about 20,000 filing cabinets of paper in the old days. That's a lot of information. And if you talk to the people from Google, they say, well, you know, everybody talks about our algorithm, but the truth is you have to have the data. If you don't have the data, the algorithm isn't worth a whole hell of a lot. And we can see this on various social media tools that are trying to measure one's influence on the web or whatever, that the algorithms may be very, very good. Maybe they're not. But there's not enough information to really make any of these numbers valuable. So you do need a lot of big data, but the question is, what then are we going to do? Getting back to the discussions of teamwork and working across teams, I think what we are going to see in the time to come is more and more data scientists get involved in what we're doing and becoming part of the teams to try and help us make sense of this information, or at least collate it in a way that we as information architects can come in and spot the patterns, because that's what we're good at. A lot of us have ADD. We see patterns long before any of our colleagues do. I don't think it's an accident that we're in this room together. I think that we do have a lot of things in common, and it's probably not our education. And the ways in which we practice information architecture are probably not the same. As far as I'm concerned, the definition of information architecture is what you do. And that's your definition. And if it works for you, that's great. And all of the defining the damn thing, I'm not sure that that's a particularly useful exercise. In terms of pattern recognition, though, I'd like to introduce you to three people. Two of them are physicians. One is John Snow. The other one is a Hungarian, Ignác Semmelweis. And the third was a professor at Tufts University by the name of Charles Taylor. I think his name, no, George Taylor, George W. Taylor. These guys are interesting for reasons that I think relate to our industry right now. So I'd like to share a couple of quick stories. The first one is John Snow. John Snow was a physician who was working with a local vicar in London in 1854 and was trying to figure out why they had had this devastating cholera outbreak. There were about 614 people that died in a very short period of time. And what they did was they actually started to mark where the deaths had occurred. And they were able to trace it to a pump where these families were drawing water. And when they closed down the pump and investigated it, it turned out that there was a cesspool that was leaking right next to this pump. So that's how the fecal bacteria was getting into the water that was causing the cholera. Now, mind you, this is a very interesting observation in 1854 because we're talking about the time before Robert Koch, before we start talking about germs or bacteriology, long before Louis Pasteur, long before Joseph Lister, any of the people who are names who were truly pioneers in an industry that was not understood at this time. People were still talking about vapors and bad air and all kinds of strange ways in which they believed that diseases were spread. He stopped the epidemic. He didn't quite know what it was with the water that was killing people, but it stopped the epidemic. And that brings me also to Semmelweis. Semmelweis was working in an obstetrics hospital in Vienna in 1842 or thereabouts. And he made a very interesting observation, and that was that infant mortality at his hospital was 3 times higher than it was for people who were giving birth to babies at home with the help of midwives. And he spent a lot of time observing and trying to figure out what it was childbirth fever. Has an incredibly high mortality rate. And so he pondered this problem for a long time, and he realized that the kids that were dying, the babies that were dying, were being delivered by physicians who had just come out of the autopsy room. Again, we're talking long before Robert Koch, long before bacteriology, germ theories, so on. Nobody would listen to Semmelweis. The physicians were horrified that anyone would even suggest that they had to wash their hands. And yet, when he got people to wash their hands in chlorinated lime, the mortality rate fell by 90%. But it took another 20 years before his ideas were accepted. And I share this with you because he recognized the pattern, and I think that that's where we provide value to our industry. And at the same time, this is the 20th year since we had the first commercial browser, and yet we are still fighting to try to explain to clients why they should even have a website. And put kittens on the front page. Now, the final person, George W. Taylor, in 1921, also spotted an interesting pattern. And I bring this up as a warning because just because you see a pattern doesn't necessarily mean the pattern is true. Now, he was a professor at at Wharton School of Business, and he came up with something called the hemline index. And it shows that the shorter women's dresses are, the better the stock market goes. And it actually there is a correlation. Nobody knows why, but it is. This is a drawing from a Danish book by a Danish philosopher, Robert Borbye Hansen. You can see 1923, we're talking about German hyperinflation and so forth. By 1928, 1929, just before the Great Wall Street crash, skirts are very high. As the Depression goes in, the skirts get lower again, and as we approach the end of the decade, they're back up at normal. So that's the hemline index. So just because you find a pattern, don't fall in love with it to the extent that you may actually believe it's true, because maybe it isn't. So pattern recognition, I think, is really, really important. I'm sorry, I didn't have slides for this, so yeah, deconstruction, yeah. A lot of us are working on apps, and as far as I'm concerned, apps are deconstructed websites. They don't have to have the whole Megillah. There are a lot of people who are using mobile phones who don't really want the whole website. So little data sometimes is good. It really is a good idea to try and find out, well, what is the key to whatever we're doing? We can see sometimes that we can take a website that has 500 or 1,000 or 2,000 pages, cut it down to 80 pages, and the conversion rates go up. It's feng shui. You get rid of the junk, the stuff that's important is easier to find. So little data is maybe not so bad. Mobile first, I find dangerous because it tends to be interpreted by a lot of employers as mobile only. And I certainly see this in Europe all the time. People say, well, we're going to do a mobile site. It's always easier to expand on something than it is to shrink it down. But what happens is they do some crappy little site that works on mobile, but then their real website doesn't work at all. And at one point it gets handed off to some junior marketing assistant who does whatever he or she feels like doing without the aid of an information architect, without the aid of a content strategist, without the aid of anybody. And the result is you end up with the Winchester House. And after 2 years, they've got a website that, again, has 1,000 pages and nothing works. So be very, very careful of mobile first. It's not that the idea is wrong, but it cannot be the only thing you do. It worries me because it's become a buzzword, a mantra for so many people. Mobile first, as though that's the solution to our industry, and I don't think it is. Okay, so putting the A into IA, that's architecture for those of you listening at home. Well, we talked about Greek. Well, let's go over to a little Latin. Fermitas utilitas venustas. These are the three keys that were decided or were defined by the world's first acknowledged architect, Marco Vitruvius Polio. And in fact, this guy, which you all recognize from Leonardo da Vinci, this is called the Vitruvian Man because of Vitruvius. Well, Vitruvius came up with these three words, fermitas. It says it's got to be, if you're designing a building, it's got to be solid enough that it doesn't fall apart. So we're designing applications that need to be robust. We have to make sure that the server response times are acceptable. We're also thinking about these things. Utilitas, it has to work. If it's a house, there has to be a place to sleep. There has to be a place to prepare food. This is where content strategy comes into our work. This is where the functionality of findability and usability and all these other abilities that we go and preach come in. But it's the last one that I want to share with you because I think that this is really important. And that's venustas, which is beauty. He thinks it should be beautiful. Now, as I said at the beginning, I think that we are talking about function over form. But I think that what we can do in terms of functionality is start to imbue our work with a greater degree of personality. So we laughed when Siri says, well, room temperature is always room temperature by definition. Oh, all right, it's 8 degrees outside. That was a funny remark. It makes Siri human in some kind of a strange way. It gives this stupid automated thing a personality. And I'd like to see more personality in our work, in the way in which we're presenting content online, in the way in which we're designing. It doesn't mean we need to make things difficult to use. It doesn't mean that we need to crap up the screen with Clippy that shows up in the corner and, farewell, cruel world. Oh, you're going to write a suicide note. Are you going to hang yourself or shoot yourself? I want to get rid of a body. So I'd like you to think in terms of personality. I don't have a solution for this, but it's certainly something that I think is going to be important in the years to come. Because the truth is, if everything is so damn findable and usable, where do we go from there? Everything looks alike. If we're all competing with pretty much the same products online, what differentiates our site if the only thing we can say good for it is that it's findable and usable? I mean, there's got to be some differentiating factor. So that was putting the A into IA. How's my time go? Design or mass production? I'd like to talk a little bit about design patterns because I have a great deal of respect for design patterns. People learn things one place. They expect to be able to use what they learn one place someplace else. It's very nice that people know how tabs work. In psychological terms, this is called retroductive inference, if you're interested in that kind of thing. But design patterns are not design. And I think that there are an awful lot of people who are calling themselves designer who are just taking these Lego blocks and putting them together in some kind of a way, and they think that they're creating real art. I think that this is dangerous because it introduces a degree of complacency in our industry that worries me, because we're not going to grow if we think that this is the be-all and end-all. I have a lot more to say about that. But I did want to share a couple of design patterns with you that I think are interesting. Here we have two silhouettes of buildings. Theoretically, these are design patterns. Somebody complained online. I showed these slides in Rome a couple of months ago with Andrea Rosmini, and somebody had complained, well, why do men always have to have those phallic symbols on their... I'm thinking, what the hell was that about? In fact, this is the John Hancock building in Chicago, and this is a tower in San Gimignano in Tuscany. Let's do this again. Here, Chicago. Here, San Gimignano. So are the design patterns really providing value? No. You don't want to worship the form. You want to embrace the content and the context. And again, it's the context. That's what we give. That's the arrows. That's putting all these words together. Remember, I said a firm notion. It's a firm notion in my head, but if you take those letters, they also spell out information. I thought that was kind of cute. Processor pedantry. I get very worried about some of the processes I hear about, and the one that I particularly dislike is Scrum. That always gets a good clap, at least here in California. I know you're a Scrum master and you know all of this. I had a Bloody Mary I could ply you with. I don't know what happened to it. Okay, but let's look at Scrum. I mean, basically, it's trying to impose a process on Agile. Agile means moving quickly and easily and mentally quick and resourceful. Okay? So what do? Instead, we say, we have the 3 Scrum questions. What did you do yesterday? What will you do today? What is blocking your progress? They may be very good mentoring questions, but I'll tell you, if you were Christopher Columbus and you had this idea that the world was round and you were going to find a passage to India, what did you do yesterday? Well, I sailed west. And what will you do today? Well, I'm going to sail back to where I was yesterday. And what's blocking your progress? It's the fucking Scrum meetings. So I would like to propose an alternative to Scrum. And I mean, Scrum, it rolls off the tongue, so I thought long and hard about how to create a word that you'd all appreciate, and I came up with Why do you laugh at that? Nobody laughed at WYSIWYG. Now, we'll practice this. We'll say it together. 1, 2, 3. Oh, you're great. You're great. You're great. And you're probably wondering, well, what does this mean? It means you do what you need to do to get the shit done. That's the only process that works. You don't want to become a slave to whatever process you're working on. Scrum is fine for a lot of things. Waterfall also works for a lot of things, for goodness sakes. But as Count von Moltke, Bismarck's Minister of War, once said, no battle plan can survive contact with the enemy. It's as simple as that. So no matter how we plan these things, we have got to be prepared for the unexpected. This is also what Aaron was talking about this morning. You know, you sit in your ivory tower or ivory cubicle and you dream up all these great ideas, and then when push comes to shove, they say, well, you know, we don't really have any money for this. So you need to revise. You need to be flexible. You need to think about where else can we go? How else can we accomplish what we want to accomplish? Break the rules and accept the unexpected, I urge you. And then finally, we have Charles H. Duell. I'm just curious, how many people Googled Charles H. Duell while I was speaking? Nobody. I'm so proud of you. No, really, that's very good. Charles H. Duell is accredited with having said, there's nothing left to invent. He was the US Patent Commissioner in 1899. Now, this is in fact an urban myth. I mean, Charles H. Duell existed. He was the US Patent Commissioner, but there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that he ever said this. However, let's put ourselves, into the Victorian mindset. If you look at what had happened the previous 25 years, my goodness, they had invented the telephone and the electric light and the phonograph and motion pictures and the automobile. There were a lot of really interesting things going on. It's very easy to believe, wow, there is nothing left to invent. We've got light at the turn of a switch. We can record things. What an amazing idea. This is really cool stuff. The telephone. Two-way communication across distances. This is amazing. So the question is there too much complacency in our industry today? And I suspect there is. If we take a look at what we've got, we have our design patterns and we have our processes. Steve Jobs says there's no point in Samsung working on smartphones because we have the iPhone and there is no better telephone. With all due respect, that's as asinine a statement as Bill Gates saying no one will ever need more than 640K. And we have our technologies, and we have a tendency to fall in love with the technologies rather than fall in love with what the technologies can do. There's a major difference there. And whatever technologies we have today are probably not going to be the ones that we're going to use in 10 years or 5 years, already today. I mean, how many of us actively use Flash? And yet, 10, 12 years ago, oh man, if you were a Flash designer, you could name your own salary. Things change. So what I'd like to do in closing here is to try to put our industry into some kind of historical perspective. So if I may, let me draw a timeline. And yes, it's very nice, isn't it? And we'll divide it up a little bit. And let's give it some dates. For a long time, I tried to figure out what was the length of an internet year. I mean, if we talk about dog years, dogs live, or humans live 7 years for every 1 year a dog lives. So maybe there's such a thing as an internet year. After all, we're in a fast-moving industry. But I needed a baseline. And the baseline I found was the car industry. And if you look here, the first commercial automobile was a Daimler, which was produced in the United Kingdom on German patents in 1896. And about 1902, you start to see Oldsmobile produce their curved dash model in small production runs. And in 1908, Henry Ford introduces the first assembly line. And in very late 1929, we have the Wall Street crash. Those are the dates. But now look at this. Let's use some other dates. That's the first commercial web browser. Almost exactly 20 years ago. And the first commercial websites started to come out in late 1994. The first commercial CMSs, the one that later became Front Page. But we also had Homestead, and we had GeoCities, and we had Tripod and other Homestead, things that allowed us to mere mortals who couldn't code to put content on the internet. And then we've got the dot bomb in late 2000. And it's interesting because we have two very long periods of incremental innovation. I think there's something to be learned by that. It works out to about 4.7 years. And if you look at that, that equates to a business cycle. And if you look at successful businesses in the internet world, if they don't have a viable business case within their first year, they generally fail. Whereas if you're in the built world, you have several years to run on. So I think there's a correlation that's kind of interesting. We are a very young industry. I think that it's fantastic that all of us are here and we're sharing so freely of our ideas. We have NDAs, we have all kinds of things, but we talk to each other, we share our techniques, we share tips, we help each other get better. That was what the whole mentoring thing was about. Thank God we have that. How many people in advertising have mentors in that way? How many people in any other industry have that kind of sense of community, that sense of sharing? The things that Chris and Lynn do are absolutely remarkable and absolutely vital. And let's try and keep that alive. But if we work this out, I mean, clearly we're not building cars that equate to 1916, 20 years old that we may be, but it does mean that basically we're somewhere in the middle 80s. And since this is California and y'all are car people, sometimes. My point, though, is that here's a quote from a French politician and philosopher, Gilles de Faupillac. "Cease not to learn until thou cease to live. Think that day lost wherein thou drawest no letter to make thyself more learned, wiser, and better." And I think that that's really what it is all about. We need to learn things every day. We are still making things up as we go along, and you know what? That's okay. We're getting smarter. We're not making the same mistakes we did 10 years ago. In 10 years' time, we will look back on today and say, imagine that they were talking about whatever. We are progressing, but it's a young industry. We need to make our mistakes. We need to feel the freedom to make things up and to go new ways and to take risks. So please, don't be complacent. And you can change the world, so for God's sakes, go out and do it. Thank you very much. Good.